Good evening, everyone. Could I please ask you to take a seat? Great. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. For those of you who do not know me, I am Professor Lisa Given, Director of the Social Change Enabling Impact Platform here at RMIT, and very excited to be opening the first of a few different keynotes that are happening across the week as part of our doctoral research conference here in the Design and Social Context College. And what a wonderful turnout for our first event, which I'm very excited to be hosting tonight. We had a lovely welcome to country planned for you, but unfortunately our guest has told us that he's unwell. So I am going to start us off with an acknowledgement of country before we get into our keynote. So in the usual way, I will say that RMIT acknowledges the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation on whose unceded lands we are gathering tonight. And I'd like to pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Before we get into our keynote, I am going to turn it over to Steve Gonson, who's going to tell us a little bit about the purpose of this event, all things HDR, and what other little gems he may want. Do you have a slide? No. Do we have a slide? I'm going to put up Heather's slide for now. Go for it.
Thanks, Lisa, and congratulations again on another really wonderful social change stream or conference that you set up. You've been doing this over several years now, and it's always a great week and series of events that you've put on. So, I congratulate you. And welcome back to RMIT, Heather. As a media and comm person, it's really good to see you again after all these years. So welcome. Like Lisa said, this year's social change falls under the broader inaugural DSC Doctoral Research Conference. It's been quite the week. So in the past, social change, urban futures, and the practice research stream all sat in different weeks. And we've brought them all together over 1 week. So this week is like a festival of milestones and workshops and keynotes and things like that. So we strongly encourage you and recommend that you come along to the week because we've really got some fantastic things all week for you, which takes place Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, plus Saturday night, which is a booze up at the pub. So if you're still standing by Saturday, we warmly welcome you to the Oxford Scholar. I would just like to quickly thank a couple of the key people who have really made this or brought this week together, because it's been quite the event. So Ralph Horn, thank you very much for all of your vision and your leadership and your support across the last few months. Andrea Eckersley, the PRS chair, who's here tonight. Andrea, it's been great working with you, and thank you for all of your support, not only in PRS, but for the whole week. I really appreciate the work you've been doing. Catherine Ross, Alan Shanks, Nicole Scott at the college, you've done a tireless effort just getting everything together. It's been, great. This is great to work with you, and it's great to see everything that you've been able to pull together in such a short amount of time. The Research Training Services team have also worked tirelessly for this week. Cicely Wong, Emma Stockham, and Kelly Wade Johnson. And another shout out to another Kelly Fu, who's also been doing great things in working with us to get this week together. So thank you all, and for anyone else I've forgotten, I appreciate and thank you. So tomorrow is the inaugural Doctoral Research Conference keynote, which will include Nina Terry and Milis Sinova, who will be doing a sort of a tag teaming keynote, which will be taking place tomorrow evening right here. And if that doesn't excite you enough, the title of their lecture, ladies and gentlemen, which is Bathtubs, Babies and Barnacles, what have they got to do with the future of research design? And that question and so many more, I'm sure, will be answered tomorrow night. And I hope it will include some bathtubs and babies, but who knows? Far from me to be spruiking my own event, but on Wednesday, I will be hosting a workshop for HDR students and HDR supervisors on all things AI and HDR. called HDR, Problems, Possibilities and Potentials, where we will be talking positively about AI and what you can actually do with AI in a positive way as both a supervisor, an examiner, and also a candidate. And that will feature an action-packed A-list panel. So Professor Mac Duckham, Professor Chris Speed and Professor Ingrid Richardson will all be on the panel answering my questions about AI, and it will be a very interactive workshop, so please do come along. I think that will be a lot of fun. Okay, but tonight's focus is really on social change and Heather's keynote, which I'm really looking forward to, Heather. Also, in addition to this, Heather will be back tomorrow for a workshop on titled Genres of Collaboration for Engaged and Impactful Research. So we're getting a good bang for our buck getting you over here, Heather. So Heather's workshop will be on tomorrow. I think there are still tickets available. Just register online. I think that's from 2 to 4. Is that correct? So please do come along to Heather's keynote tomorrow. Also, we've got milestones. So HDR candidates, higher degree research candidates are presenting milestones across the week, and there's several social change candidates presenting. So all of the candidates here at in our college, they fit sort of within practice research, urban futures or social change, and social change candidates will be presenting across the week. So please have a look at the schedule and come along to support them and offer any feedback that you can. So I'll leave the stage now and make the way for our superstar for the night. Congratulations again, Lisa. It's always great working with you, and enjoy the night. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. And it is exciting this week because we are refashioning ourselves, as Steve mentioned, and what better theme for the week than regenerative futures, which is very much about looking ahead to like, what will tomorrow look like? What does it mean in terms of regenerating ourselves and our world and how we think about things? And as I was looking ahead to this event, I started thinking, you know, regenerative futures, what take do I want to bring about this topic, which is very much emergent. This is a new topic, I think, around many different disciplines, but we often think of it in terms of things like the circular economy, different aspects relating to urban futures, how we see the world in that lens. And I had the pleasure of serving with Professor Heather Horst on a panel not too long ago. And I started reflecting on her work and digging up some of her old papers, that kind of stalker thing that you sometimes do in the world, thinking, this was resonating for me because so much of what I do in my own work and when I think about social change is around technology futures. I'm really starting to think, well, what will that look like? What does the regenerative concept mean in the context of social change and technology? So I was really thrilled that Heather very quickly agreed to come back to her stomping ground. She has been here at RMIT in the past as one of our Vice Chancellor's Research Fellows. So I'm really pleased to introduce her to you tonight. And I won't take too much of the floor time. I'll leave that to her. Heather's director of the Institute for Culture and Society at Western Sydney University. Her research examines digital media and technology, including the use of digital media in transnational families, transformations in mobile telecommunication infrastructures, particularly in the Caribbean and Pacific, and materiality through studying homes, clothing, and technology. Her publications include The Cell Phone, an Anthropology of Communication, Hanging Around, Messing Around, and Geeking Out, great title, Kids Living and Learning with New Media, Digital Anthropology, Digital Ethnography, Principles and Practices, The Moral Economy of Mobile Phones, Pacific Island Perspectives, and Digital Media Practices in Households. Her creative outcomes include 2 documentaries on smartphone use in Fiji and Papua New Guinea, and a film on the Fijian fashion industry. And she is actually just off an airplane from Fiji, in fact, coming here on her way home. So thank you so much, Heather, for joining us, and I will turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Lisa, and thanks, Stephen. It's actually, feels like I wore my RMIT red today to signal that I'm back. But it's really a pleasure. It's been great to get to know Lisa. I think on a panel last year, we were at another workshop, and great to sort of see all the work that you brought here. I think it's great to see Ralph, who I used to follow around all the time in DSC, and kind of have always missed working with him. And then Stephen, you're the kind of MediaCom representative, and I think also a lot of the work today I'm talking about is connected with the Center of Excellence for Automated Decision Making Society, which is of course here. So it sort of feels like a homecoming. It sort of feels like this is the place where this kind of work belongs, and hopefully it's engaging enough to kind of keep you awake, especially at this hour. I know many of you have done full days, and I'm certainly glad I'm at the beginning of the week and not the end, because I think it's going to be there. But really pleased to be back, and really also pleased to hear that PRS is happening, because it's been that was always one of my favorite places to be. So I'll stop with the kind of love and sending out the love, and I'll kind of get on with the sort of thing. I'm going to kind of move between the slides and kind of talking. This is a sort of project that we've been doing directly as part of the Center of Excellence in Automated Decision Making and Society, which sometimes they forget about society when people mention it. And so I'm here to remind you it's here. And I think one of the things I just wanted to mention is I will be talking quite a bit. I'll kind of shift between I and we. This talk in particular was kind of written quite closely with the person who was the postdoctoral research fellow, Dr. Adam Sargent, who's now a lecturer in anthropology at the ANU. And so we've been doing this, but also it was in conversation with a range of other people. Some people will remember Edgar Gomez Cruz. He also came through here, Luc Gaspard, and a range of others who have been involved in this project over the years. Okay, so I will start here. So it's become, I think, a bit of a convention to begin with a statement or an anecdote about the increasing pervasiveness of and power of automation. AI, automated decision-making technologies that are seen as sort of fundamental to shaping our lives. Algorithms increasingly govern what we see in the internet, our internet searches, and in our social media feeds. And there are systems capable of making automated decisions based on machine learning models govern more and more aspects of our lives, from whether we receive a loan, secure jobs. It may predict the time we spend in prison, or even the likelihood that we'll be searched by police officers. However, as Kotler has pointed out, who counts as the us and we in these contemporary truisms is far less clear. So in my talk this evening, I want to introduce what we're offering as a kind of framework for studying automated decision-making technologies and their social effects. And as I've been mentioning, this is part of a broader study that really was designed to map the current state of automated decision-making as it's currently unfolding in regions outside of North America and Europe. Our work has really involved, and I'll be kind of drawing throughout little pieces of this, reviews of 6 regions of the world situated in Africa, the Caribbean, China, Latin America, the South Pacific, and South and Southeast Asia. And I won't be talking specifically about our findings from these regions, but I'm sort of looking at what we can glean from some of these insights from looking at specific regions at particular moments in time. And rather than covering the globe, our aim is really producing these kind of partial accounts is to destabilize and displace commonplace narratives about both the origin and stories as well as the origin stories as well as the futures of AI, automation, and automated decision making by offering accounts of how ADM is being done otherwise. All right, let's see. But before launching into these principles, I want to be really clear about how we're defining automated decision making. I think ADM and there's a whole group here of people here, and even in the Center of Excellence, we all have quite different definitions and takes on what it actually means. But for us, we've been thinking about ADM in terms of social practice. In other words, rather than kind of looking at what a particular technical apparatus involves, we want to look at like why particular routes or tactics are sort of used to do that. So just to explain, taking up this approach, we use the term ADM rather capaciously to group together a wide variety of practices that involve digital technologies and various forms of automation. So some of these involve automation that is directly impacting decision-making, such as in the case of fintech, where applications use machine learning algorithms to help make decisions about to whom loans should be distributed. In other cases, the technical apparatus is part of a shifting landscape in which decisions are being made, such as in the example of Caribbean artists, an artist who's using these things, who are experimenting with NFTs or non-fungible tokens. In all of the cases, the concern is not with the technical apparatuses in and of themselves, but rather with the emerging social practices as they're appearing on the ground that are enabled by technologies like machine learning, algorithms, blockchains, drones, and natural language processing, and others. So I think for those who are kind of more tech savvy, this might be a little bit slippery. It sounded a little bit slippery. And I know that when I explain it to some of my more technical colleagues, they're kind of like, that's not automated, that's not automation or AI or automated decision making. But I'm hoping that the kind of broader frame that we've taken throughout this study will become apparent as we kind of go through the talk. I also think that I need to probably define what I mean by decentering here and why we've chosen the term decentering as opposed to decolonization and a range of other kind of terms that are kind of in a similar vein, but are doing kind of different work. So I think our task throughout the project, as I was mentioning, was both to challenge dominant narratives of unidirectional flows of algorithmic power, while also demonstrating what accounts that do not presume such dynamics might look like. So to do this, we focused on different parts of the world that are often left out of global narratives of automated decision-making. Indeed, given the presence and perception of Australia more generally, I think in the globe, we often see the entire Center of Excellence enterprise as a way of kind of decentering dominant narratives. Certainly we're seeing in the ADM Center, the focus, the kind of, I think it's Tao Phan's work on testbed Australia, that on the one hand, Australia is seen as typical of, North America and Europe and a place that's sort of more manageable enough to study. But on the other hand, there are things about rural and remote Australia that make it quite particular and challenge a lot of the work that we're seeing happening in other contexts. So, So despite, and yet given the kind of lack of work in contexts such as, I think Australia, but also the term that I often have used, the global south, or what I've used in this paper, the majority world, which is a kind of frame of kind of thinking differently about things outside North America and Europe. And I think in particular regions such as the South Pacific and Caribbean, where my own work has been situated, we've been very keen to prioritize places and contexts in the world that are less visible in the field to demonstrate the diversity of ways that ADM is being imagined, anticipated, and practiced. So as we went about this project, we increasingly found concepts like the Global South inadequate for actually capturing the diversity of activities and enterprises that we were encountering. So we do deal with many countries that would technically be categorized as the Global South, such as Kenya, Namibia, India, Argentina, Fiji, and others. Yet the experiences of these countries do not easily align with this sort of image of the Global South. For example, while all of these countries are dealing with infrastructure and funding sources that are limited in various ways, some of them are actually the sites of global innovation and experimentation with ADM technologies. Kenya and India, in particular, with regard to fintech, are really seen as the vanguard of work in the world globally. And while others have a much more developed usage of things like chatbots, other regions such as than in the global north, we're finding places like Argentina is really sort of sophisticated in the way that they're sort of using these across a range of apps, et cetera. So the inadequacy of terms like global north and global south for engaging with ADM has been widely noted by critical scholars. This is not only because, as Nick Holder and Gloria Mejias point out, China has emerged as a center of power alongside the US, but also because, as I think RMIT scholar Janet Reutman has recently argued, framing analyses at the outset as being about, for example, ADM in the global south, which is where we started this project, presumes that ADM is in some locales is structured by geopolitical and historical power imbalances. So following Reutman, the point is not to deny such inequalities and power relationships, but rather not to presume that they have fixed effects or shapes across diverse fields of practices like ADM. We begin with actors on the ground pursuing the creation of technical systems and aspiring to produce value in digital economies. We aim to bring out new landscapes of power that are emerging from and impinge upon such pursuits. These are now no doubt marked by the histories of colonialism, empire, and the global political economy, but we should not presume that these relations are simply replayed in digital forms. And so this brings me to my first example. Okay. So the first one we really wanted, so we basically have 5 principles that we're sort of arguing is a kind of framework for taking a decentered approach. And, you know, we didn't capture everywhere in the world. It's impossible to do so, nor do we think that it's appropriate to do so. And you could certainly focus on, you know, different regions. You could focus on religion. You could have a whole range of ways of kind of selecting your object of inquiry. And arguably, you could also do it in a context like Australia, where you're looking at non-dominant communities. But one of the things that we really wanted to, that we were really finding when we were looking at this, what was happening around the world, is that ADM is actually not placeless. So for us, a decentered approach foregrounds the in-place nature of all automated decision-making practices. This means actually holding open the possibility that ChatGPT may never look the same in Mandarin as it does in Swahili, or even across various regional dialects of a language. ADM systems, like all technical innovations, develop out of and respond to and are currently transformed by places. The specificity of things like legal regimes, religious practices, environmental conditions, colonial histories, cultural habits, and more, all impinge upon and actively shape how automated decision-making systems are designed and used. And they also make visible the unforeseen consequences such use has in places around the world. So decentered approaches attend to the shaping of regimes of ADM innovation by national governments, as in Egypt, where the state has set out explicit government focus areas, including the Arabic natural language processing project. A focus on place also draws attention to the affordances of different locations. So one of the startups that we've been interviewing, and this is particularly Adam Sargent, who was involved in this one, is an organization called Blue Sky Analytics, which is a climate tech company based in India. One of the things that Blue Sky did is actually they aggregate free open access data on climate from around the globe, analyze it, and then repackage it up for organizations, not just in India, but actually globally. So one could take this company, Blue Sky Analytics, as a kind of example of the placelessness of ADM, since the company has satellite offices in the Netherlands and the US and operates on a kind of global scale. Moreover, most of their business is done with companies not based in India. Yet it was the urgent state of air pollution in Delhi that spurred the creation of a startup in the first place. And it was also the relatively cheap programming labor available in India that allowed Blue Sky to gain a foothold in the market to begin with. So our analysis emphasizes these crucial interventions of place here as an effective catalyst and enabling market. And place also shapes ADM practices at a number of scales. So beyond the national, regional histories and specificities can play an important part. So our case study of digital agriculture in China, for example, brings this out by focusing on the Guangdong province. At the core of these initiatives is the provincial government's aim to create a fully traceable agricultural supply chain by leveraging things like drones, blockchains, and other technologies. And in our account, it really highlights how such projects emerge through the unsteady collaboration between provincial level government agencies, such as the Guangzhou Market Supervision Administration and Supervision and Administration Bureau, as well as large tech firms such as Tencent. That initiative is taking shape as part of larger efforts at rural development organized around the possibility of making agriculture more efficient through technology. Yet the specific contours of the project, unfolding as an organized intervention across a regional market and encompassing growing distribution and marketing, must be understood in the context of the history of state-led development, as well as more recent histories of regional development. So this point is often missing in monolithic accounts of China or Chinese cities. And indeed, a lot of the work that we hear is that, we'll eventually in this spaces, everyone will eventually be like China. We have to understand what's going there. But even China is a much more diverse place than we sort of normally hear about. So the second point that we really wanted to look at is the extent to which ADM is actually embedded in the global political economy. So we position ADM systems within global political economic relations, but we do not treat this as determinative. So here we part ways with much of the work on things like data colonialism by Calder and Mayhus, and their focus on depicting a world system of data extraction. While such accounts do take place seriously in tracing global systems of power, they tend again to cast locations in the global south, the majority world, primarily as sites of cheap labor and data for global tech corporations. Places like India, for example, are framed as becoming or having become pools of cheap, semi-skilled digital labor, while also providing sources of data due to the relatively less strong regulation around data and privacy. And these are certainly important dynamics in India. And as the Blue Sky Analytics illustrates, it's part of that story. But such transnational flows of data and labor cannot account for the practices and consequences of Blue Sky's ADM practices. So our account of ADM treat the countries, companies, and organizations that we follow here not as cultural dupes or passive recipients of global technical innovations or capitalist strategies of accumulation. Instead, our approach attends to the alternative aspirations, goals, and directions of ADM systems as they are built and transform local contexts and histories. And in this orientation, we take inspiration from my colleague Catherine Gibson's work, arguing that our critiques of capitalism must not presume the complete hegemony of capitalist practices. Rather, our analysis should also elaborate and be attuned to the diverse economic practices that are emerging in our present. I just wanted to mention here, I've left out a section in a kind of longer exegesis that really goes into how global tech firms are actually placing themselves in particular regions of the world. So in our Latin America thing, you can see the investment in fintech. You can see here on the left-hand side, Microsoft Research, which has a long history of building organizations in sites like South Africa, India, et cetera, that they're setting up labs in particular kind of places of the world, not just to tap into pools of labor, but also expertise that's there. And I think the most striking one to me is that I think in the last few years, Google has set up Google AI in Accra, Ghana, a place that, and this is kind of the map of all of their Google AI places, a place that has always, from the kind of information society days, often generated kind of new and innovation sites in the kind of global tech firm space. And I think that there's some interesting things sort of happening around why they feel like Accra is an interesting place to do, and the kinds of questions they're looking at, the kind of, access to drones and that sort of thing, but also what Accra symbolizes is quite interesting there. That's the short version. Okay, so building on this kind of work, we want to also focus on the kind of diverse histories and practices. So decentered approaches are also attentive to the local practices of ADM, but this does not mean that we see resistance everywhere. Rather, it means that we strive to locate the unique possibilities and trajectories of local practices without presuming at the outset that these are inevitably circumscribed by the relations of power and capitalist structures of accumulation. For example, in our account of Flying Labs Uganda, it really surfaces an alternative imaginary of data collection and the production of value. On the one hand, Flying Labs Uganda is an NGO and is a chapter of a global organization that actually trains drone operators and promotes drones for humanitarian use. There's even a chapter in Fiji, for example. Scholars have rightly critiqued such projects and pointed to the deep imbrication of ADM technologies such as drones with things like imperialism and military violence. But rather than take such claims of humanitarian drones as ideological trickery, we actually are taking seriously the people we talk to's own perspectives on their use of drones. And so we've done, in a lot of these things, I'm not talking much about my methods here, but one of the things we did is interviewed a lot of these kind of new global tech firms around the globe or new organizations, NGOs, et cetera, to talk to them about what they were actually doing in practice, because there's very, very little actually written anywhere about these sort of things. So you have to kind of go straight to the source. So doing so allowed us to bring into focus the organization's imagination of its role as a facilitator of local data collection and agglomeration. Such an imaginary is echoed in other case studies and suggests that we should not understand the social force of ADM practices as a developmentalist model of invention and innovation, or adoption rather. Instead, it's important to remain attentive to the diverse imaginaries, ones that emerge out of and respond to local contexts that fuel and shape these projects. Flying Labs Uganda has chosen not to accumulate data, in part because the legal complications and the infrastructural costs of establishing and maintaining ownership of data projects. These contextual features in turn reflect not only the histories and political economies of Uganda, but also their aspirations and goals for developing ADM and other technologies. And finally, and I think you've been hearing this kind of throughout my talk, we want to really focus on automated decision-making, AI, et cetera, in practice. So there have been really important critiques of the Western-centric biases, both in the creation of ADM systems and in the study of their local social impacts. For example, the assumption that technologies such as computer vision extend human capacities of visual perception and recognition actually depends on a particular understanding of what a human is and where their capacities and actions originate and end. And I think you hear some of this when we've been engaging with some of our colleagues on the kind of indigenous practices and looking at, the extent to which they don't see a binary between the human and the environment or human. You start to sort of have to kind of question, the kind of object you're starting with before you can move forward. In the face of such critiques, one alternative is to look for different lenses for technologies like artificial intelligence or automated decision-making. And Sari, for example, has rightly called attention to the often rich philosophical engagements with technologies outside the West that make very different assumptions about categories such as the human agency and power. But rather than searching for a different framework with which to understand automated decision-making writ large, a decentered approach starts from the heterogeneity of existing practices which generate, modify, and reproduce systems of automated decision-making. In this, we're inspired by ethnographic engagements with digital media more broadly that focus on understanding the things that people do with novel technologies and in their everyday sort of lives. Similarly, we focus on capturing the practices that people in different parts of the world are engaged in and suggest how these practices may rely on and create different understandings of what technologies like machine learning tool models, drones, robots, chatbots, and so on can actually do. So our case studies can and do suggest claims about the different ontological and epistemological commitments that shape technological systems, but we do not presume that these claims originate from a particular perspective. Instead, we begin with the practices that are complexly informed by the teams of engineers, the entrepreneurs, as well as the users who engage with emerging ADM systems. So practices weave together, sometimes uncomfortably, multiple images of technology. For example, in the case of Stone Technologies here, which is a surveillance startup in Jamaica, illustrates this quite perfectly. And I'll just sort of mention here, this is a company, a lot of the engineers were trained in the computer science department at the University of West Indies, which is a kind of regional universities, but the one based in Kingston. And so these are some of the examples of Michael Stone, et cetera, the founder. What this company does is basically develop a series of surveillance systems, such as one of the projects is this meter reader. So they partnered with the Jamaica Power Services, who monitors electricity. And basically, they're trying to kind of counteract the theft of electricity, which happens all over, urban Jamaica in particular, but also other places. One of the things they do is rather than sending humans to go out, often in areas that can be a bit unsafe, et cetera, they're actually using drones to kind of monitor what's going on. Another project they've done is to work with kind of farmers, cattle ranchers, companies, et cetera, to sort of surveil the borders of places where like cows are kept. So to make sure, again, theft and those sorts of things aren't happening. And they've also they partnered with the university to kind of, it's not a sort of rape prevention sort of tool, but it's something that if something happens and an alarm goes off, they send the drone out to capture footage so that they can more readily catch suspects who might assault or do other sorts of things to people on campus. So these are the kinds of activities that they do, and you can see here they've also Michael Stone and many of the people have been developing a kind of AI organization both in Jamaica, but they're also sort of expanding to the region into that. So I wanted to just sort of point out, as in the case of Flying Labs Uganda, the technical assemblage in question drones is deeply implicated in histories of militarization, et cetera. And the whole project of protecting private property, for example, is of course linked to and supports capitalist strategies of accumulation. So this is not sort of, power to the people resistance. This is, it's very much in that context. Yet our approach to this case is not to read the features off as conclusions of the analysis, but rather to see how these tensions are negotiated by Stone Technologies' business practices and articulated by their CEO, Michael Stone. In attending to his own interpretation of the work that Stone Technologies are doing, we're able to understand how diverse values of regional autonomy and self-determination are uneasily hitched to drone piloting. So Stone Technologies is dedicated to working with other local startups and supporting a local vision of what ADM could do for Jamaica. These practices will not turn back the accumulative practices of big tech companies, nor will they challenge the logics of accumulations on which they're based. Rather, they offer to analysts willing to lend them a careful consideration an image of a different way of organizing the creation of value from automated decision-making systems and the data that they collect. So when we talked to him, he said, look, we don't want to sell this off to the US. We don't want to do this. We want to help solve local problems and give local solutions. And it is, yes, very much embedded in our local capitalist, sort of economy. We also want to make a profit and do those sorts of things. So it's not a simple sort of answer one way or another. We can't, wholly celebrate it. Yet we also want to sort of acknowledge that it's fitting a sort of need in that context. So this brings me to the final principle, which is really around ambivalence. So attending to practices of ADM allows us to produce accounts that move away both from the techno-optimist accounts that hype the latest ADM technology as a panacea and the techno-pessimist accounts that critique ADM's negative effects while taking them as inevitable. This is really prominent in, kind of media studies. A lot of my colleagues who I work with, we're constantly having this sort of battle in our conversations. In contrast, decentered approaches stick close to practices on the ground in order to unfold the contingent, partial, and ambivalent nature of ADM projects. Our accounts are resolutely empirical, not because we ascribe to a sociological positivism where the aim is to amass statistically significant numbers of cases from which it discerns structural tendencies, but because we seek to move deeper into empirical practices that engage, challenge, and rework ADM in order to trace their precarious unfolding. The impacts of ADM practices are always ambivalent, reproducing global asymmetries of power, even as they create local opportunities for self-determination. So we also see this in the case study of Tuvalu's experiments with digital nation building. Like many nations in the South Pacific, Tuvalu stands at the extreme edge of climate change, facing the imminent threat of disappearance due to rising sea levels. In the face of this threat, the nation has begun to work on creating a kind of digital twin that will ideally offer Tuvaluan citizens some sense of belonging in the face of forced relocation. We approach this unfolding experiment as a practice, taking seriously its potential for preserving histories, memories, and perhaps even livelihoods in the face of radical destruction. At the same time, our approach also highlights the politics of technical issues around where such a digital twin will actually be hosted or live. One suggestion has been the metaverse, which would have complex implications around corporate interests and national data sovereignty. Moreover, attending to digital twins as complex practices draws attention to the thorny decisions around which version of Tuvalu is to be preserved. The aim is not to make a pronouncement on digital twinning or even its use in this context. Instead, we want to bring to light the ambivalence, fragilities, and political tensions at stake in diverse practices of ADM across the world. So, final slide. So I want to kind of return to, I know the theme of this event is kind of regenerative futures, and I want to kind of give a nod to some of the work that we've been thinking about, you know, both in terms of the sort of documenting what's now and looking at where it's going, but also kind of thinking with AI and thinking with technology and thinking with communities about what the future may hold. So we're clearly at a pivotal moment of change that requires careful research and reflection to understand the moment and the possibility of shaping different and alternative futures. And so my aim this evening has been to demonstrate the need to focus on how ADM technologies are put to use in these diverse social, historical, political, and economic contexts. From the emergence of platform labor arrangements to digital contract work, ADM systems are reworked through imaginaries of labor, data, or profit. And these reworkings are often partial, constrained, and tenuous. But to fully understand the forms of exploitation and accumulation that shape contemporary ADM systems, such negotiations cannot be ignored. Accounts that ignore the diverse routes through which ADM are being made in different places across the globe or reduce the difference to developmental models, they're not at that stage yet, they actually miss the mark. And so I wanted to draw attention here through this final example to some of the ways in which these kind of complexities and histories are being harnessed and practiced in the imagination. And so I wanted to draw attention to, this is kind of my new, I've just discovered this artist. He's on Instagram. I'm super excited every time I look at this, so my apologies. But so these images are have been produced by the Trinidadian artist Rodell Warner. And basically what he did is he went into the archives of, you know, the kind of historical archives of, you know, looking for images of Caribbean people. And what he discovered is that every single image of Caribbean people, you know, from the kind of history in the archives are can basically with in the context of plantation slavery. They're always, you know, this, you know, the sugar plantation, the master is serving the families. Those are the images. It's the only image that the only image that there is. And he's been sort of asking, you know, taking these images from the archives, engaging with a kind of machine learning program in AI and asking the question, you know, what if our labor was actually valued? What if we actually got paid for the work that we did? What would our world look like? And so these are kind of a series of sort of things here. So one of the images that I find probably the most striking is of the woman sitting up reading a book. There are no pictures in the archives of people from this particular time from the Caribbean reading books, and to just put that in that context and sort of see what that means to particular communities, to things like that, is a real sort of act of possibility. There's lots more that I could say about this, but one of the things that he's very clear about is this: it's not about creating kind of intentionally misleading histories or trying to kind of do a kind of revisionist history where you're kind of repositioning the kind of past, but it's more about opening up the future trajectories and unlocking the kind of potential. And even Warner has said that when he first saw these kind of images, he was really struck by what it meant, like to have one of your family be in one of those portraits. I mean, there are no family portraits of a Caribbean family, that are outside of plantation slavery. And so to just put these things, so what is it to have a body that looks nourished, that looks well fed, that sort of thing. And in his words, he said, "I'm leaning into the imagination with these images, thinking of them as visions from an alternative or speculative version of the Caribbean so that they function as notes on possibility." So in other words, and in what I've been trying to kind of argue here today, is that centering our accounts on the use of ADM in different places foregrounds the kind of diverse social practices that undergird what AI, ADM, and other forms of automation actually might become. The aim here is not simply to counter meta-narratives with local specificity, rather taking inspiration from feminist critiques of capitalism and work that acknowledges the plurality of capitalism or capitalisms. The aim is to understand the diverse goals, trajectories, and aspirations as they unfold in practice in order to draw out the potentials of doing ADM, AI, and automation otherwise. So I think I'll stop there. And I'm going to leave the images up.
Thanks, Heather. That was a really interesting conversation. I was just struck by, or wondering about the actual, how you make decisions around which technologies you're going to examine in which context. So, I mean, you talked about drones, robots, chatbots. Is it really about when you land in the space, you see what's actually happening, or do you have some other ways of, finding out or figuring out?
I mean, we had kind of strict definitions of, we were going to go through this, and we started, I mean, basically, you know my work. I wanted to land, right? I wanted to land there and find stuff, but COVID happened. And so we started doing kind of more internet searching. And when we were doing the more technical systems that, are, traditionally seen as ADM or automation or whatever, all we were coming up with were kind of research reports from people, like scientific reports in different, Nigeria or wherever. And so we started to actually just start to search online outside of, I mean, Edgar went, for example, in Latin America, he went and, we originally had a very strict, like, we'll search these databases, we'll search all that stuff. And then very quickly it became evident, one, there were some regions there wasn't much there at all. And then in others, you had to search in the Spanish database, which is a totally different sort of system there. So we kind of let go of the structure of that sort of thing. And then what we started to do was just kind of go, okay, when we look on this, this is what's coming up. And, it was Google searching, it was following, it was a lot of very, just kind of fortuitous things. And what we're finding, and we've done these kind of draft regional reports, and there's certain themes or topics that come out in particular regions in sort of interesting ways. So like in the South and Southeast Asia, a lot of those reports that, they've been talking a bit about, like things like automated informality. There's a big fintech kind of focus, a big kind of social media, kind of focus, Some of the organizations were doing kind of like anti-hate speech, that sort of stuff in India, China, another sort of round of it. And in the Caribbean, there was quite a bit on drone security, that sort of stuff, used completely differently than in Africa, which was disaster response, looking out for things. So that's kind of how we did it. And so it ends up that it looks like a big grab bag of, like blockchain was huge in the South Pacific, where there's been a kind of history of that, and people are buying islands and telling people they can only use coins, and, which is tied to a very long history of extractivism and experimentation in the Pacific. So you see these sort of things reverberating through that, but that's kind of how we did it. And, it's also a fast moving kind of thing. So we've been trying to kind of make sense of it, with things. One thing I'll just say also is that we also worked with kind of, we tried in places where we had expertise and experience, and collaborated. So in Trinidad, one of my former PhD students, Shiba Mohammed, jumped back in and joined me on this sort of project and did a whole bunch of work with connecting into the artists in the Caribbean using NFTs. So it was very much a kind of evolving kind of process. Adam's worked in India for 10, 15 years. So that was, kind of the way we went. I think I rambled on answer. Did I answer the question? Okay.
Thank you. I assume you know about the book Weirdest People in the World by Joe Henrich?
Yep.
Yeah. So ADM evolved in weird countries. So by definition, everything will be ADM will be looked at in the lens of the weird culture. To look at every different culture, it's going to become very expensive. How can the cost be justified? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think we were pragmatic in our sort of thing. So we only did sort of 6 regions our colleagues who worked in China are fluent in Mandarin. Edgar's fluent in Spanish. So we kind of tried to work with people, but we don't have anything from the Francophone region of the world. We don't have anything from the Arabic world in this particular, kind of thing. So we were very clear about the kind of, I only had a little slice of the pie from ADMS. And so we tried to work in places where we had some sort of expertise and could actually bring that kind of history and more contextual kind of factors to that. Because I think if we were to, one of the things we want to do and why we were calling it decentering is that we thought that actually trying to map the entire globe or map the entire thing was just reproducing a kind of imagination, colonial imagination of the way that the world's carved up there. So, I think one of the things we know is that we still fell victim to the kind of nation that actually, if we were to do it again, we might pick, like I have a colleague, Bart Barendrecht, who's doing work on AI and Islam. And his work is, some in, Egypt and other kind of regions. He has students kind of working there, but also a lot in Malaysia and Indonesia and things like that. So just kind of taking a different category helps you to kind of push. And so I think we feel like we can say less definitively what, this is what's happening in the South Pacific, or this is what's happening in there. And that's not what we're trying to go, if you think this way, and let people who, have expertise in those areas, have linguistic capabilities, who, do the more of that work if they're inspired to do so. But what we're trying to do is say, when you start to look at this, you start to imagine differently about what's possible, even in Australia. If you were to take this back then to the broader ADMS project, it is about pushing back at the things that seem obvious or inevitable, and this is the way that we do it there. And that's been more of the project than to say, we know exactly what's happening in this country. We know exactly, because one, it's moving quickly. When there's, like like I said, probably someone in the sciences would be horrified that I just collapsed all of these things together. They would have a much more strict definition of what counts and what's in that. So that's been more of the project with this than a kind of universalist or kind of capturing every culture, because we can't, and two, we don't think we actually would want to. And I think these, like this project is really sort of insane because it's also about moving across time and thinking, differently temporally about that sort of these sort of practices. So is that clear? Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Heather. Yeah, I have a question about what do you think about the downside of the development of ADM based on your research? For example, in Indonesia and Cambodia, the development of fintechs is also followed by the rise of online gambling addiction. So maybe you can give a nuance about the problem that you encounter in your research. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I think in most of the places we were not focused as much on those kind of social consequences, largely because of a lot of the places that we were doing where we didn't get to go and do the kind of longer term thing. But I would say that the one thing that's coming out, and I think is, we've been thinking about it much more strategically and thinking about what needs to be done about it, even in the Center of Excellence. There's a whole body of work on the kind of environmental impacts of automation and ADM. So I think Deborah Lupton, Michelle, what's her name, Richardson, and Sarah Pink and et cetera are doing a project now in this next phase of the center that's really looking at, the kind of how much water it takes to, to use that sort of stuff. I think colleague back there, Jason, has been working in the South Pacific looking at deep sea mining and minerals and that sort of thing. And he's been really, he's been really kind of, looking at, batteries. These things take batteries, and to survive, to keep kind of generating these sort of things that the devices that would be used in, a place like Fiji or a place like the Caribbean, if it's a phone, those are more devices, that sort of thing. So we're starting to think about those sort of consequences for, automation and AI, just, what it actually takes to use those sorts of things. So I'll leave it there because it's very speculative, but I think, certainly I should also just mention probably more of the negative things, like Adam did a lot of work on fast money loans and schemes in India, and did a lot of work looking at, I think it's called collateral data or something like that is what his thing is. But he, one of the things he found was, kind of predatory loan agencies actually going into people's WhatsApp lists, going into the threatening families things, berating them, things like that to get people to pay their loans. And a lot of people in India will get these kind of loans because they don't want to ask family, and they don't want to, they don't want to kind of burden them, or they don't want to be obligated or in debt to them. And so there's a lot of kind of predatory sort of practices that are really sort of interesting and scary. I mean, he's got calls from call centers harassing women, telling them they're going to come and rape them. I mean, really horrible sorts of things. So we're definitely starting to see those things. But I think for a lot of the regions that we're looking at, there's so few studies, so little research. And if there is research, sometimes, linguistically, it's not getting out in the journals we read, that sort of stuff, that we've just got to keep, going. And so that's sort of the spirit of the 5 principles, is that we kind of keep those principles, but people can kind of take them and adapt them to wherever, different regions in the world where they want. Did that start to answer your question? Yep.
Fantastic talk. Thanks very much. Your whole perspective is around the decentering. I just wanted to push you a little bit on what you take the centered approach to be. To what extent is the global effort in research around AI centered? Is there an identifiable kind of, I suppose, centered activity against which you're kind of decentering? Where is it located? What is it? What are you talking about when we think about the centered form of this research?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. And we did kind of go, are we just creating like another, another version of world systems theory? It's like, are we reproducing, the central periphery and things like that? So we did, we are kind of, we're kind of aware of what that sort of work does. Part of the reason we chose decentering is that we were finding that the decolonization literature wasn't quite, it was sort of obvious, the conclusion, that you were going to come to. And we're definitely in the spirit of, kind of looking and taking a deeper look and doing it, but it wasn't actually, like the conclusions were already there before you did the study. You knew exactly what you were going to find because, it is a kind of, a D, whatever sort of thing. With the decentering, what we wanted to do is just say, what if we shifted in frame, or what if we, and I think, sometimes we're still grappling with whether that's the right phrase to kind of do, but we definitely, what we wanted to do is say, and I think this is the big kind of thing, like for something like the Center of Excellence that we're involved in, like I see decentering as a way that we could actually even look in Australia, or we could look in London. You could look at communities that aren't, that are underserved, under that sort of thing, not imagined in those sort of things, and not the people that developers and other things are thinking about. We're starting to see, I think, a more sophisticated literature on this sort of grow as a lot of our colleagues in China, a lot of our colleagues in Southeast Asia, a lot of our colleagues in India are starting to kind of look at the practices that they're sort of seeing either in their context or, where they're where their research, et cetera, interests are. So it is starting, but it's a tricky thing because most of it, I mean, we still even in the center we hear, we're all going to be like, you got to go to, Southeast Asia because that's the future. That's where you have to go. And it's always sort of seen as that developmental model that, so like, that's why some people wouldn't recognize what we're finding in the Caribbean or the South Pacific as, legitimate ADM because they're on that kind of developmentalist sort of thing. So that's really more the move. But if you have another term that you think would be great, let me know, because we have been really struggling with it. And originally the project started out as ADM in the Global South, and so we were trying to kind of, basically we're the one group that's doing not Australia in the center. And so that's the kind of shift that we're kind of doing and trying to talk back and engage with so that people think there. But we have other people like Hai-Ching and other people who are around who are also thinking differently that way. So, yeah, thank you. It's a good question.
Thank you. Really enjoyed your talk, and I've just been sat here looking at these pictures for a while now, and so I was just thinking it makes me think about reparative futures rather than just regenerative futures. So I was just wondering if you could say a bit more about the impact that these types of images might have in the context of thinking about things like healing the injustices of the past in relation to colonialism, and I'm wondering about what the actual impact of these types of images might have, say, for example, on communities in the Caribbean, and whether this is a sort of technological intervention that is healing or rather actually reinvigorates people's anger about those injustices.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, this is a relatively new, exhibition, so I can't speak exactly to what impact this has done, but I know for the artist, and I know that, I mean, in the Caribbean, I think elsewhere, but in the Caribbean, I'm very cognizant of a lot of the kind of artistic practice kind of pushing back at, both, I mean, historically also in song and those sorts of things. It's a way of kind of thinking otherwise, to own your own space, to kind of do that. But I think like I mentioned, the artist was really reflecting on, I mean, this exhibition has gone around like it's starting to go around the globe. He's fundraising GoFundMe for his master's degree. He's, you know, these have been quite powerful for the Caribbean diaspora, and I think a lot of the work around kind of reclaiming, finding, repair, that sort of stuff is quite there. But these oftentimes it's much more around kind of connecting to previous practices, that sort of things. But what's powerful about this from a kind of Caribbean ethnographer kind of perspective is the visibility of it. And the Caribbean has a long history of visibility being, you know, the kind of core way that they want to kind of make themselves there. I mean, I will just say this is not ADM, but this past weekend I was in Fiji for the kind of this Fiji Fashion Week event, and one of the designers was a Maori woman, and she had come in to talk about how she goes and buys secondhand clothing, and then she calls it Maorifies them by like adding on particular particular pattern things, making a sleeve that just has a little bit of a Maori kind of thing, just little sort of subtle things. And she just kept talking about making sure that you take up space, that you take up as much space as possible, that you are seen, you are visible, and you make your dress, you know, stand out to the room so that people have to make space for you in a way that you don't have to do. So I think that these things, I mean, I think this is one of the powerful things about being in like design in social contexts and all the stuff with PRS and things like that you're using. You have a community of people who can think and make and do and push on the kind of boundaries that not everything is going to be as amazing and powerful as, you know, these kind of images to me are, but I think that to me is one of the kind of interesting ways about this kind of futuring work and thinking about different kinds of futures that I think we should be thinking about. But you do have to be careful, and it has to be the right person, the right sort of thing. I mean, he's a Trinidadian artist speaking to other people in the Caribbean. It's not me coming in and, you know, messing around with something and saying, you know, what do you think? That could be actually quite traumatic and harmful. So it's making sure you know who you're sort of working with, giving space to the right people and collaborating with them to kind of work that through. Not sure if that answered your question or just, but it's a great, I mean, I think it's a really exciting space to kind of be thinking about. So. Yeah.
I think we're going to leave it there for now. And I love that we're ending on this concept of reparative futures. That can be maybe next theme, I don't know, for this entire conference. But please join me in thanking Heather very much for this engaging talk. As Steve said up the front, there are still spaces available tomorrow in the workshop that Heather is running. So if you are keen, please reach out to us and we will make sure to hook you up. But for now, I would like to welcome you to please stop on your way out and have a bit of, you know, evening cheer, as it were, wine and a bit of cheese and conversation. Thank you so much for coming. We'll see you tomorrow.